Hi science students, welcome back. Today we're going to focus on ions. Ions can be positively or negatively charged, but ions overall, as a general description, are going to be charged particles due to an unequal number of protons or electrons. Pause the video if you need to write down this description. We're going to start by talking about those atoms that lose their electrons. So as an atom has extra electrons in its valence, sometimes those atoms will lose their electrons bonding to another atom. And so those electrons leave their atom and go somewhere else, meaning that there are less electrons than there were in the neutral atom. So when those electrons are lost, the overall charge of the atom becomes positive. So they're going to be a positively charged ion. Due to the fact that there are now more protons in the nucleus than there are electrons in the rings, simply because some of those valence electrons have been lost. A positively charged ion is going to be called a cation. And I'm going to draw a little example of a cation here. So here's my nucleus. Let's say I have 4 protons in the nucleus, and I've got my first ring with 2 electrons, and then I've got a second ring, but there's only 1 electron because I've lost my other electron. This is going to be a cation because there are more positively charged parts, protons, than there are negatively charged parts, electrons. The easiest way for me to remember the difference between a cation and an anion, so that I can easily recall which one is which, is if you know me, you know that I really like my cats. And so cation has cat in it. And the way I remember it is that cations are positively wonderful. And we're going to spell them like cat paws. They're going to be positive. Get it? Let's go back up to the top, and we're going to talk about what happens if an atom gains electrons from another atom. So if an atom is gaining electrons, it's going to have more electrons in its atom than protons, and it's going to be negatively charged. So it's going to be a negatively charged ion. And a negatively charged ion is going to be called an anion, A-N-I-O-N. Kind of like onion, but with an A. And so let me draw an example of an anion as well. So I'm going to put my 4 protons back in my nucleus here. And then I'll put my first ring. I know I can put 2 electrons in there. And then I'm going to put my second ring. And because I have gained some electrons, I know that I'm not just going to have 4 total. So I'll go ahead and have my 4 of my neutral atom. But then I'm going to add a couple more. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons and 1, 2, 3, 4 protons. This negative charge of these electrons is greater than the positive charge of the protons, making this an anion. I don't have a fun way to remember anion, but if you know one, if you've thought of one, let me know so that we can share it with everyone and everyone can more easily remember. So I want us to flip to the next page, or if you have space below where you've drawn this, you can draw this there. I'm going to give you a couple examples. So I'm going to put it at the very bottom of my page, but you may not have room and may need to go on to the next page. Let me grab a different color to use. I'll use green down here. So an example of some cations would be sodium. So sodium starts out with 11 electrons. in its neutral atom. So I'm just going to write 11 electrons when neutral. And we know that if we're talking about cations, we're talking about those positively charged ions, they've lost some electrons, and that's what's caused them to become this cation. So, for example, my sodium would become Na plus, and this plus sign means that it's a positively charged ion, meaning that it now has more electrons. So it's going to have, it has less electrons, 10 electrons. When it's a cation. So all that has occurred is one of those electrons has been lost from the sodium and is attached to a new atom, and we would write it to show that it is a positively charged cation with this little plus sign. If there were multiple electrons being lost, we might put +2 or +4, depending on how many electrons are lost from your atom. But this is a good starting point for you. Let's jump over to anions. So an example of an anion, we'll use oxygen, which is O. So oxygen starts out in a neutral atom with 8 electrons. But we know that anions, to become negatively charged, are going to gain electrons from other atoms. So if I were to write this one, I would write O minus. A minus sign is going to show -1 extra electron charge is what that's showing. So there's 1 extra electron. If I had 2 more electrons, like in the example that we've drawn here, I would put -2. But in this scenario for oxygen, becoming an oxygen anion, I'm just gaining 1 electron. So I'm going to have 9 electrons when it's an anion. So let me zoom you back out so you can see everything at once. It needs to be a little taller, doesn't it? So if you need to pause the video to write any of this down to be able to have this as a reference, please do so. If not, have a really great day. Bye-bye.